I work here in the Edinburgh office, and then I'm also here with a few other Fangelers. There's Lexi, and then James, and Christy, and also, if anybody is working in React and looking for a job, we are hiring right now. We're also hiring in like other things, apart from React, but most of us do React, so yeah, come and talk to us about a job if you want. And we do loads of pretty cool, exciting stuff about React. I think we're probably going to talk at the next meetup. So yeah, we're hiring.
Cool. And Product Forge is doing our streaming. And thanks a lot too for support there.
No worries. So before that announcement, who here had actually heard of Product Forge? Just want to kind of show of hands. Okay. Of those people who had heard of Product Forge, who knew that we ran hackathons? Yeah, that's pretty good. Just wanted to get a bit of it to see who actually knew what we did. So we are running a few hackathons in the next year. The biggest one of which will be the Digital Health Product Forge, taking place next February. It's the third year we've run that event. We're hoping to make it the biggest health act in Europe. So 200 participants, 50 mentors, should be a lot of fun. And we're also hoping to run a Scottish history hackathon, a climate change hackathon, and an accessibility hackathon in the next year. So if you're interested in any of those things, feel free to come and chat to us after the talk.
That's awesome. Brilliant. And where can people find the stream?
You can go through our Twitter, and you can obviously go on our Twitter page, and you'll get the link there. And we'll do a little bit of editing after this, and then it'll be published on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So
nice.
So don't mess up.
Brilliant. Our other sponsor is Code Your Future, and Rob's going to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, okay. So together with Will, we both work at Kadaba, but also have taken part in Code Your Future. It's an all-volunteer run coding school for refugees and asylum seekers, taught by awesome mentors that work in the tech scene in Edinburgh and Glasgow. So it happens every week. There are 14 amazing refugees, asylum seekers, and others who are learning to code, some with a background in engineering and some with very little technical background. We've already graduated our first cohort class in January, and they've been doing some awesome things, and so we're about 3/4 of the way through, is it? So about 3/4 of the way through our next one. And we're always looking out for mentors, even if you can't make it to Glasgow every week. A lot of mentors come on the Slack channel so that they can help ad hoc during the week with different types of modules. You can find out information at codeyourfuture.io or get in touch.
Yeah. I mean, also partnerships, companies interested in having one of our students
hiring
in for a day, shouting a developer, hiring the ones that have graduated. It's also really welcome. It's awesome. Cool. Because we don't have too many people this time, I think it would be nice for us to do a little intro. There's quite a few new faces, which is nice. So just who you are, are you looking for work, are you hiring? It's also really welcome. So yeah. Just a quick one. I am.
Hi guys, my name is Ricardo. I'm about 7 years older. I came from a background in technology called Business Catalyst, which they work on liquid templating engines, and they prototype and develop websites in general for the worldwide. And basically I'm kind of skipping off from that and going more into engineering development with Node.js and rendering template engines, and I'm just finding it fantastic, and kind of using microcontrollers like Arduino and things like that to control as well. So it's a super fantastic technology. And I've heard of React, and I thought, why not? Let's try this, and probably in here and see what you guys have in thoughts and see what's best.
Awesome. Nice. Yeah, I've used Business Catalyst. Long time.
Yeah. It's kind of going down now, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Hi, I'm David Hawkins-Hosh. I'm a full-stack developer with a focus on front-end. Graduated from CodeFun in 2016, and currently looking for a new job, preferably using React.
I'm Zsolt from Edinburgh. I'm technology consultant, so working with startups and technology companies to develop their product. But just recently, well, since October, we started to build a tourism app as a spin-out of the tourist hackathon organized by Product Forge. So we just put it on Google Store today for testing, so hopefully we'll release it
Cool.
soon.
What's it called?
Quest Native.
Nice. Awesome.
I'm Greg. I work for a small finance company that our motto is openness and transparency, and I'm a reformed Java developer. We did a lot of nasty server-side and stuff, and lots of horrible frameworks that you guys never want to see. So we do all our front end is being converted to React, and we have sort of an Helios web services that is being consumed by, and we're quickly running as fast as we can to use GraphQL to replace those. And we also are really looking for developers. Very easy to work for a company, lots of benefits.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Christine. I'm a full-time graduate from last year, and I kind of do like full stack with front end here.
Cool.
Hello, I'm Caroline. I graduated from full-time last year. And I work at University of Scotland as I guess a full stack developer. But I have a new job, so that involves React.
Nice.
I'm Matt. I mainly do back-end development with Python, but I do a little bit of JavaScript with a dreaded word jQuery. So I'm looking to see what React is about and whether it's worth getting to the current year, etc. But
Nice.
Alex, I used to work here, but now I work for a super startup trading insurance tech in the future place. Adobe Flash and Air stuff with React and React Native.
I'm Michaela. I also graduated full-time, but last month, and in July I'm starting at TV Square, and I'm just kind of interested in
Nice.
I'm James, I'm software engineer in Agile, and I'm into React and associated things.
You're very introduced.
I'm pretty much the same. Yeah.
not fuzzy.
Just like.
Hi, my name is James. I'm a front-end developer, and I'm using React. Work with Janitor. You'll hear a bit more about it in a second, but it's mainly video conferencing communication tools for the education sector and the sector.
You guys hiring though?
No, not let me say. No.
Yeah.
Ivan, I'm going to do a presentation in a second, but I work with James, so mainly with React, TypeScript, and full stack, a bunch of other things also.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Samir. I work for Zonal. I'm full stack developer, specifically backend background. I'm into React recently, about 3 months ago. So I want to see explore more about React, so that's why I'm here today.
Nice. Cool.
Hello, my name is Ines. I've been a developer for about 3 years, mostly with Java, and I've done React for about 3 months now, and I'm in this React honeymoon phase right now. Interested in TypeScript as well. So.
Hello, I'm Jeff from NCR in Rotterdam. In my career, I've been working with mobile technologies, and I'm mainly working with React, and I'm mostly mobile developer at this moment.
Hello, I'm Darren. I'm a Python engineer, previously a Java engineer. I've been a developer for 2 years, and I currently work here at Banjo. I'm not hired.
Nice.
I'm Keith, software engineer at Tesco Bank. Been a developer for 15 years. We are rewriting everything with React for banking cloud, obviously.
Awesome.
We are hiring mostly full-time, but
Cool.
we are hiring, so looking for anyone with Node and React experience. Great.
Awesome. Cool.
Hi. So I'm going to talk about React and TypeScript. And first of all, I've seen that not a lot of people have done a lot of React yet. So I think who has written like React professionally yet in their job? Okay. Who has been using Redux in their own project? Okay, cool. And TypeScript? Yeah, I know. You're working with me. Okay, so it's going to be a fairly technical talk. So if you have any issue, just stop me and ask for explanations. Okay, so React and TypeScript, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So who I am? Move. Yeah, cool. Okay. So I'm a full stack dev. So at Agenta, we're creating a product that is called vScene, which is a video conference solution for health and education sector. So it's mainly about connecting people with WebRTC inside the browser with room systems. So for example, for students to be able to follow a course through a room system that someone at the other side of the planet is going to give with their own browser. You don't need to install anything, you don't need to have anything on your computer. A simple browser is enough to have video conferencing. So yeah. And what is important is that we have rewriting we're rewriting the whole vScene that we have done into TypeScript. So why? First of all, the code consistency. We're just 4 in the team, and we have done a product that is like 30K lines of code in 6 months. So you can guess that there is some problems between each people writing their code their own way, writing the documentation their own way, not writing documentation because we didn't have time at all. So there's a lot of issue when you try to actually test the code, and you have a lot of inconsistency between each component. In React, by default, what is the normal way is to use prop types to define in a component what are the requirements that the props that you're going to give to it are. The problem is that prop types is always at runtime, and you don't detect always the HKs at runtime. Even if you do a lot of testing, it's in general not possible. So with TypeScript, you can do the same thing, but at compilation time. So you can know if there is something that's going to go wrong, even in a really big code. And it also avoids some testing, which we always like nobody likes to write tests. And the tooling. Who is using VS Code, for example, here? Yeah. VS Code is integrating TypeScript by default, so even when you're coding, you don't have to install anything. It's doing the type check for you when you're writing. It can say to you, you're dumb, directly, before you even compile. That's really cool. Annoying, but really cool. Okay, so yeah. Atom TypeScript is also working. Prettier, if some are using that, is also supporting TypeScript, so your code looks really pretty easily. Jest is supporting TypeScript if you want to test your component directly written in TypeScript. So you can have errors like on types, on anything directly at with your CD/CI pipelining. So it's working. TypeScript lang.org has a lot of documentation on how to integrate it. For example, with Webpack, with Browserify, with Rollup. There is everything that is defined on. If you want to do some testing on your own project, you can find tutorials to do that yourself. So I'm not going to talk about build tools or anything today. You can just find the documentation on internet. Okay, so I'm going to have a few examples of the reworks we've done. So the good, the simple, the bright. Let's take a pure component, completely dumb, really dumb actually. It just takes a props which has a message, so it's a string, and renders a simple div. Really cool. How to change that in TypeScript? Well, it just concentrate on the important parts. You look at prop types, you replace that by an interface in TypeScript. So, yeah, TypeScript, you know what it is. I was going like a little way faster, but you know, all of you, what TypeScript is? Okay, Cool. So you define an interface. Instead of having prop types defined on your component, you just define it as the input of your components. And it's working. It's quite simple, actually. Yeah. And you don't have prop types anymore. And it can be checked at runtime and at compilation time. Now let's get a little more complicated. There's a lot of code, so if you don't see, like, just go a little closer or ask for explanation. Okay, so a Redux connected component. How to change that to TypeScript? There's not the rendering. I just took care of that. So you have Redux, so you have action that are fired, and your state, which is bound from Redux to your component. In general, you just define prop types, and the problem with prop types is that you can't have a real complexity in what you're defining. Like, if you have an action, you just say function, but like, what are you putting in your action, a number, a string, anything? It's not precise enough to do real testing. Same thing for example, object like location, which is like what is used with Redux and React Router. Location, it's not precise, you don't know what is in it, you don't know what is available right now, you don't know if there's a route defined. It's not enough to do real testing and really sure that you're not going to run into an undefined at some point. So we're going to rework all that. Don't worry, it's not that complicated. So first of that, the actions. You take the action that you have in Redux, in JavaScript, so simple. You define an email, a password, a status if you want to have a middleware, saying it's an open request, it's not treated yet. And you pass it into TypeScript. So, first of all, an enum, because you need to know which action you are firing. An interface to define what is going to be your action everywhere in your code. At any moment in your code, you can say, I'm receiving that type of action, you know what is in it. And you recreate your action creator quite simply. You just define the type of what you're putting in it and the type of what gets out. That's okay. Next part, the reducer. Also simplified. You receive your action. Whoa, it's a success. So we're just going to put our token and authenticate it to true. What is in the token? What's in the action, the rest? You don't know. You don't even say what is in the state. You don't even say what is going out of the state. It's a problem for testing. So let's define all of that. You define, so the store, that's what I called, it's what is in the reducer. So you can, from anywhere, know what are the data that you have available. Root store type, it's just to define, if you have used Redux in general, what you do, you don't have only one reducer, you have a bunch of reducers that you just put all of them together. So you can define like a global type that's going to say, for anywhere in the application, all the data that are available are this data, and you can define them directly in the reducer, precisely which type of data. So if someone in the team just modifies one reducer, all of it in the team will have a new type. All in the team will be able to see if in the components there is a problem, there is something that is not available anymore. That's really useful when you do a lot of rework in a team. And so you can just define in your initial state with a type. You need a state in entry, which is your type. You have your actions, because now you know what is the structure of your actions, and you return the same store. And now, for example, if you take out token and you put anything that is not in the action, it's going to say it to you directly. So that's type checked. That's the first thing. Okay, the component in itself. There, okay. Don't worry about what is in the middle. The most important thing in general is that. History, it exists in TypeScript. So you can directly take the type. Your action, well, you have an action creator, so it's a function. So by itself, it's a definition. So instead of saying, I fire a function, you just take the action that you are firing, and it works. If someone changes the action, it's going to expect the same thing from all your components that are connected to it. Same thing for the store. You already have your store. You can take only the part that you need, and you already know what is inside it. If someone deletes a field in the store, if someone adds a field in the store, you know from all your components that it's there. And it's working. Was okay, not too horrible. Just takes a long time to do it. Okay. Now, the ugly. There's going to be a lot of explanation. So, let's show you one of the things that we have done in our website, which is scheduling a meeting. Something quite simple. See the component on the right. Okay, you add someone, you add an email, you add a moderator, it's another person, and you add a room system, which is completely another type. And it has a totally different behavior. Guess what? That's the same component for all three of them. And even worse, the whole state is managed by this component. So the data that are going in there are impossible to test. There is bugs all the time. There's always going to be an event because there is a browser that has something weird that is going to be fired wrong. It's impossible to maintain it. And when you look at the code, yeah, that's how it's coded. So, that's the props types. Good luck defining that in TypeScript. Like, the file to write the definitions, well, it can take a few days. And it's not sure that it's going to work, because after that, you're going to have to manage all the errors that are going to be created by that. But let's say you begin to do that. You have a lot of courage. So you begin to rewrite that. It's this component. I've taken that directly from our own code. So yeah, that's not an example. That's this component, the big one, that manages the state of all three of them. So this component is the little input. So 3 times that. Really cool. Let's say you have done that for the first component. You get inside the second component, and you find that. Someone has done that. So if you're familiar with Redux, it's easy to find the issue. If you're not, I'm going to explain that. You have your store in Redux. So it's basically the whole data of your application. When you bind it, you take the store and you select the part you want in it. And that is a props for the component. So basically, a parameter that is passed at runtime. So what it does is it selects a dynamic part of your store, any part of your store, and bind it to the component. And any event that is fired in this part of the state is going to be firing on this component, re-rendering it. And even worse, way worse than that, what's the type of the data props? Like, because you can have the whole store of the whole application, what's the type of that? How do you know? So, you see that in your code. What's the solution? Exactly. Okay, first thing, you find the guy that has done that and you hit him hard. Second solution, you can define the data props as any, or array of any. Why not? It works. It's going to compile, it's going to run. But that kills the whole point of TypeScript. Like, you don't know what you are having as a data, you don't know what you're using. It works, but it's going to keep the same error. Or you can try to do something more exotic as defining it as a union type. Like, it can be an array of people, an array of room, an array of emails, an array of banana. We don't care. The problem is that every time that you're going to use this data, you're going to need to check what is the dynamic path that you have set to know which type it is, and you're going to need to cast it to that type. Every time you're using it. Guess for that component how many calls we have to data? More than 30. It's really funny. If you put switch on every of these 30 calls, like your components goes from 100 line to 2000, something like that. It's horrible. So it's not really possible. So maybe we were wrong from the beginning. So yeah, if you can't define the behavior of something in TypeScript, clearly it's not TypeScript. It's just that your code is wrong at some point. If we have done that, it's the why we have done that, like the data that is selecting it. Because we have too much rework, we have too much things going on with the same component, not enough time to write it the right way. So at some point, you don't just need to define types and check your code. It's just that there is something wrong with your code, you need to redo it. So, yeah. Actually, up. But it also has a lot of good points. It's easier to understand how something works. When you are in a team of 4 people, it's kind of okay to go to another person and just ask, how is it working? When you're 20, 30, 50 people, maybe not on the same continent, it's not as simple. When you have types, you know what is the input of something, you know what is the output. And you can check that it works the right way, easily. It's way easier to understand it. And you don't need documentation, you don't need a lot of testing to do that. It's really easy, it's just a few tags that you add in your code for most of it. So it's just making the effort of writing a little more for everyone to understand a lot more about what you're doing. The impact of change. That's something that has been really important with our application because we're changing a lot of stuff really fast. And in general, you always run into issue where someone has worked on something already, someone has not finished something else, and everything goes wrong. With TypeScript, you can already know before you're even running that. And it's horrible when you run that in production. With TypeScript, you don't end up like that. It happens, like, really. But, yeah, it's not just defining types. It's not just like Flow or other systems like that. You don't just add a few types and say, okay, we're good. In general, you have a lot more to do. It's an effort. It's not just passing to TypeScript. It's not just changing the name of a file. You have a lot more to think about it. But in a way, if you have the time to do it, it's something good because you really think about how you approach the component, how you think mainly on functional programming. You really think about what is going wrong in your code and how you could have done it better. If you have the time to, you can improve it. And yeah, TypeScript forces you to do that at some point. Otherwise, you kill the whole principle of TypeScript. So yeah, for TypeScript, for the one that wants to try, there is the add types that exist on GitHub. There's the link, so it's definitely type/definitely type. There is already typings for like most of the libraries that already exist for React Redux, for React, for I don't know, React Loadable, React Dates for the ones that use that from Airbnb. There's a lot of stuff that exists already for Webpack also if you want to use Webpack with TypeScript. It exists and there's almost everything already there. So you need to code only a little for your dependency and a lot more for your own code. Okay. And I think I'm finished. So I guess there's going to be questions.
How easy has it been to implement TypeScript incrementally?
Okay, for
How
us,
does it work?
it's possible to use it incrementally because we couldn't do that with the amount of code we had in like a few weeks. It was not possible. It took us 4 or 5 months to rewrite, like we are at 90% of the code in TypeScript now. You can actually do it because the TypeScript compiler allows you to input also JS in it. So it's not going to type check JS, but you can directly use it inside your code. So you can do that incrementally, and the more you get into it, the more details you have on your errors, and you correct file by file.
So as you go along, like you convert one.
Yeah, you can convert component by component, one by one.
TJS or whatever, and then
Yeah, it's TSX.
or TSX, and then the compiler will be stripped on that. But then if you're importing other JS files, it's fine with things that are JS and JSON.
Yeah, you can have both of them in the same project without any issue. It's just managing the Webpack configuration. As I said on the beginning, you can find that kind of stuff on directly the TypeScript website. There is all the tools to do that, but you can have that kind of stuff, like because it's not possible to go full TypeScript immediately. You're gonna run into way too much error. And on top of that, you can define the level of strictness you want from TypeScript. So in a project where you, for example, incrementally moving to TypeScript in general, you don't activate everything immediately. it's gonna just say no. But you can activate, for example, limiting the usage of some types of variable, making sure that you don't have unused parameters, all that kind of stuff, and activating them one by one. And you manage the errors of one parameter, you increase it, you manage the error, and you just do that, and incrementally you really increase the quality of the code.
So, I know you didn't want to go too on the build stuff, but like, do you still use Babel?
You don't use Babel. Actually, it should be possible. Probably someone has done that, but you use TypeScript, which translates the TypeScript code into JavaScript, and Babel takes care of that into ES5, ES6, whatever you want.
So is that the sort of build chain then? So if you're in a mixed project.
Yeah, what we do in our Webpack config is basically I select depending on the extension. And for TSX, the chain is so the TypeScript compiler, Babel, and well, I don't remember the last one, but something to bundle the whole thing. And for JavaScript, it's just Babel directly and bundled. So you can select.
Would you suggest TypeScript for virtually any JavaScript project, not just React?
I would suggest it for a lot of different projects. For example, the small library we add that we use in the project, I've moved them into TypeScript before trying that on the big project, just to see how it works, how easy it is to get with it. And yeah, for a lot of libraries, it's really useful because what you can do, for example, is with Rollup, you can, or I think Webpack can do that also. I haven't tested it. You can extract the definitions of your project and send them also in the distribution. So if someone has TypeScript and use TypeScript in their own project and they import your dependency, your library, they're going to be able to type check the usage of your library. And that's really useful with versioning. So you can directly just update your definition if you have an API change. And they're going to see directly when they compile that there is something that has changed that is going wrong. So it's really useful for dependency.
Have you noticed any performance changes either with compile or runtime?
Compile, yes.
Slower or faster?
No, slower. But also on the build tools, you have some help for that. You can put the type checking on another thread than the actual compiler. So you can still have Webpack do incremental compilation. Horrible. But having another thread that is doing the actual compilation. So like if you're talking about Babel, like it's directly getting rid of the types inside your file and passing it through Babel, but it's keeping a version on another thread and type checking the whole thing. And so you're going to have your error, but asynchronously. So that's okay in terms of performance. On the build for the CD/CI that we have that actually like type check everything, it's, I don't know, like we have a, would say 20-25% overhead. But it's really worth, like in the end, it's really worth.
How do you find the Texas number helps in terms of the changes or refactoring and things like that? So if you're writing vanilla JavaScript and you don't really know exactly what does something undefined, you have to write and guard against it as you write JavaScript. Do you think TypeScript helps you with that in terms of null checking and refactoring and things like that?
Well, for undefined, if you use something that can be null, it's just not going to compile.
Yeah.
So you're forced to guard against the undefined in a way. But in components, it's not as much a problem because you can define, if in the props you define that it's required, you know for the whole chain, it's going to be from the beginning set as required. So there's not an issue after that of guarding anything.
Like in terms of refactoring and changing existing code when you realize that the implementation isn't great or you don't like it, how does the type system help? Is it more useful, or do you end up like kind of having to change the code and also your types?
Depends what you call useful. It can be frustrating when you have really complicated algorithms to do that kind of stuff. It happened to me when I was using, the web, for example, if you're using really specific browser vendor because sometimes TypeScript doesn't allow you to do that kind of stuff. It happened to me when I was using the WebRTC library. There is some part of it that are not defined because they're way too browser specific. So that small parts, I've left them in JavaScript because it's not possible to type check, but it helps a lot to minimize the impact of that kind of uncontrollable stuff. And in the rework, yeah, you have to rewrite some code, but it's only when, as I said, like if you have really something that is impossible to define the type, in general, you know that it's not going to be maintainable in the long way. So if you're forced to rewrite it, yeah, but you're going to have way too much error later. So it's a matter of deciding if it's worth for you or not. Like for us, we had the chance to have that time available, so we did it. But yeah, I can understand it's not for everyone. It takes time. Like it really takes time.
So what about debugging it's possible. Is it more difficult or is this news development more difficult than
I wouldn't say if you begin to use React, go for TypeScript at the same time, because it's a superset of JavaScript. If you've never done object-oriented, it can be quite difficult to get, I guess, because it uses a lot of what you could find in Java, for example, all the system of interface, class, and things like that. But because it's JavaScript, it's closer to functional programming. So I think if you put everything together at the same time, it's just too much. It's impossible to get through. But if you're familiar with React and you just want to improve a little your code, it's a good thing to just test and see if that's for you.
Yeah, I was just more interested in the fact that technically TypeScript is translated to Java and JavaScript, and yes, you're also using the React markers, right, inside your code without any problems with the TypeScript. TypeScript is just going to custom the.
Basically, yeah, it's just changed with JavaScript. The markup is still JSX, so it doesn't change anything on that. Because it's just a superset of JavaScript, when it's compiled down, it's just pure JSX. Like, I think if you want, you can just use the TypeScript compiler and see directly the JSX, how he renders it.
So, yeah, technically, you're going with the TypeScript.
With the JSX, inside the tutorial. There will be then bundle. And then someone can develop a nightmare to debug to find a specific line in the context of the code and specific line in the code.
With source map, it's okay.
So it'd be the same, just without the type.
Yeah, it's the same as when you're using Babel. Like in general, your code doesn't look at all like what you're actually writing. So it's the same. You can have source map that go all the way through and find directly in TypeScript what is wrong. With VS Code, you can even put breakpoints, for example, in TypeScript and directly have it working inside Chrome or something like that, and having directly your code rendered. So you can, directly in VS Code do that kind of debugging. VS Code is really nice for TypeScript, for that kind of use case.
You mentioned the unit test runner for, I forget which framework was it?
Jest.
So it seems odd that I don't know. I mean, I get you want to test against TypeScript, but your thing that's running in runtime is not going to be in TypeScript. So wouldn't you want to test in a non-TypeScript world?
Okay. Okay. Why we did that? When you actually execute the test, it's going to be in JavaScript. So you're actually testing what is bundled at the end. But you can write the test in TypeScript and also the component that you're typing. So for example, if you're testing a component which is in TypeScript, you can know if after some changes, the test needs to be updated because, for example, the types have changed. If someone changed a component, you can directly detect it inside your types in TSJest, even before running it, because you know that something has gone wrong. For example, we're using Storybook. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You can do live testing at the same time that you dev and do anything. So you can directly with TSJest have Jest testing your declaration to just check if something is wrong in the test or if something is wrong with the types. It's way more useful to know if you have an error that, like, it's not that you have a regression, but it's actually that you have really something that is different, like you have a breaking change. But yeah, no, what is tested is still JavaScript because it goes through Babel before being executed.
What happens if you've got a dependency that doesn't have type definitions?
It happens. Either you ask the guy that has created the dependency to create a TypeScript definition. It can work. Or you can define the types yourself. I've done that already. In general, the good thing is you don't need to define the whole code, just what you're using if you want to have it. Or you can just say any. Like if you don't really care about your dependency and you know that it's going to run, if it's already tested, you know it's running fine, you know it's not the issue, you can just define it as any and use it the way you want. Otherwise, you can define like just the interface, so just the few methods that you're calling, and just define the type of that. And you like declare it globally on your application, so everywhere you use it in your application, you know it's just this part. And it's also helpful to know like the coverage of the library that you're using in general. So minimize it this way.
Just wondering if you had experience using it with React Native.
No. Because already React Native is like kind of a nightmare to run sometimes. I guess it should be even more horrible. And you need to. It's supposed to, but never tested it. And the problem for the build tools, I haven't found anything on React Native. Maybe it exists, but I haven't found it. Is that you need to like change it in Webpack or Rollup or anything that you're using. You need to actually bring the TypeScript compiler. And the React Native compiler is kind of not easy to get into, so I don't know. I haven't tested, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm getting a bit of a novice with both, but starting a new project where multiple people will be working on it, so it'd be great to have types. I've got more experience with type languages.
I know they're using Flow a lot in React Native, but for me I tested Flow, but there's just less tools that are available for Flow, and it's like the integration with VS Code of Atom is just not as good as TypeScript. I think we can blame Angular for using TypeScript and not Flow, but yeah. Okay. Well, thanks.
Talks. They were only having one because the other had to be cancelled. If you'd like to give a talk, we have only one confirmed for the next meetup, so it's really good if you know someone. If you want to give a talk, it's always very welcome. Just thanks again for Product Forge for live streaming and for Fanjo for hosting us. We still have pizza. Enjoy, stay around. Some people might want to go to the pub later. Cool. That's